So with that, we can get started. So when you talk about identity in this case and cloud security, so first of all, cloud security is a very crucial aspect of our day-to-day activity in the cloud environment. So it's really important to make sure that we have implemented proper cloud security mechanism to make sure that all the resources that we have within our cloud environment are well secured. So as part of the proper security mechanism that are required for our cloud security environment, we now will talk about today the aspect of identity management, which is also a central part of cloud security because, as you know, identity is basically how you how you're able to access the different resources within your cloud environment rather. So that means that identity management in this case acts as the gatekeeper in the case now you're trying to access the different resources that we currently have or are utilizing in our cloud environment or in our organizations. So with this in mind now, you can be able to dive deep into our discussion today and first discuss what are some of the challenges that organizations or most users experience in terms of identity management outside there. So one of the challenges that we talk about is now the complexity in terms of monitoring our security environment. So as you know, most of organization actually contains a lot of resources or other assets in the environment. So this means that they have quite a huge number of identities in their environment, which may even pose a challenge in terms of managing these identities. Maybe it's now they have like 10,000 users in the organization. People are leaving and joining the organization every month. So it becomes a bit complex for this organization to be able to manage who is accessing what resource and whether the account was deleted or deactivated when they left the organization. The other aspect of complexity is also now managing an organization that contains spans in different domains. So let's say you are a huge organization whereby you also have maybe like a partner organization and you frequently interact with a partner organization, but they're on the different domain. So ideally, you also expect to be communicating seamlessly, but now the challenge here is to make sure that when that collaboration between the two different organizations occur, we also need to ensure that there is proper security in terms of the resource access across the different domains and organizations that currently interact with each other. The other challenge is also in terms of using multiple security tools. So in this case now is whereby we talk about over budgeting in terms of the tools that are purchased for identity management. So you might find a situation whereby an organization has purchased multiple tools to solve a common problem. And then these tools don't work hand in hand, so they provide inconsistent results. So you find that one tool is telling you you have a problem within this specific area of your identity, and the other tool is telling you this problem has been resolved. So another issue is also the case whereby you find yourself having multiple tools in your environment, which now results in those also inconsistency in your detections. So the other part also is on the lack of visibility and control over access to the resources that you have. So here we're talking about now the scenario whereby as an organization, we currently have lots of resources in our cloud environment. People are accessing our cloud environment. We have external contractors or external consultants who we invite to access our cloud environment, maybe for some projects. So basically, since we are engaging different identities to access our resources, are we able to also provide overall visibility into that and ensure that there is also proper security and we're able to detect in case there is any anomaly detected based on the access that some of these users are accessing? The other challenge also is in terms of now enforcing these compliance and policies across different cloud platforms. So This is a scenario whereby you find an organization maybe is currently utilizing something like they have the Azure, AWS, and GCP, and these platforms, they each have identities and people are logging in and accessing resources on those platforms. So it becomes a challenge for most organizations to have a way of being able to maybe centrally manage and have a visibility of all the identities and access that our staff or the contractors have to these different cloud platforms that are currently being used maybe by the organization. And finally, the last challenge that you can mention is now on the risk within now the identity theft and maybe even insider threat. So as you know, humans, we normally say, are the weakest link when it comes to compromise by external factors. So in this case, now you can be able to look at how exactly can misconfiguration or maybe even excessive permissions to the identities that you have issued, how can it increase the threat or the risk of organization being targeted by malicious actor, or even maybe users using weak passwords, or even maybe the organization had not configured some multi-factor authentication to be able to force our users to authenticate and prove their identities. So this is just a highlight of some of the challenges that are currently faced in terms of identity management within the current cloud security landscape. So based on this, now we can be able to look at how exactly, or rather, what are some of the strategies that you can be able to explore in terms of making sure that we have a proper and a robust cloud security measures to be able to improve our identity security and management. So one of the areas that we can discuss is on the cloud security posture management. So basically, this is the capability that you can be able to configure for you to be able to your current cloud environment. So basically, you're able to monitor your cloud environment and understand what are some of the access that you have issued in terms of the access to the resources that you have in a cloud environment, who is currently assigned which type of specific role in our environment. And basically also another area that you can look at is also on the entitlement management. So previously, one of the challenges that we mentioned in terms of identity management is the scenario whereby an organization is currently using multiple cloud platforms. So they are on AWS, GCP, Azure. Yeah, so in that case, that means you have different cloud platforms and you need to make sure that we're able to have a central dashboard to be able to understand the different access that our users have. So for example, as part of this entitlement management, there's a solution known as the SIEM, the CIEM. Basically, the SIEM or the CM in this case is one of the capabilities that you can be able to leverage that has that capability to give you a central dashboard that will help you understand who has specific access, maybe in our AWS account or in our GCP or Azure. So within one dashboard, you're able to have a way of having an understanding of your overall security posture in terms of the identities that we currently have in our organization. So the next part that you can also look at is also now on the identity and access management policies. So basically, this is whereby now you can be able to define or have an understanding of, yes, we have these contractors who want to come and perform this specific task in our organization, but based on the specific task that they are doing, are we giving them the admin rights that they require? So you might find that maybe someone just needs to deploy some specific application, but the organization decides to give the contractor the global administrative rights instead of just limiting the rights to the specific access that is required. So we need to have a look at the requirement and basically be able to give out the specific administrative rights depending on the specific access or the activities that the contractor wants to perform in the tenant or the organization in this case. So that means you are leveraging on the principle of a least privilege by making sure that we are giving only the admin roles that is required for use in this case. So after giving these admin roles to these users, we also have to consider reviewing the access that we have given these users. So it's also advisable to be performing some access reviews so that you're able to make sure that, yes, this contractor, for example, we gave them the admin role to perform a project last month, but maybe it's now 2 months down the line. The project was already complete, but they still have the admin role in our environment. So it's also a good behavior to just make sure that we have a mechanism or a policy to be able to be performing those frequent access reviews such that maybe it will go to a designated administrator within the organization who will be able to review and approve. Maybe they'll say these specific admin rights, they still require the admin rights, so they'll allow the person to still have that access to the organization. If not, they're able to automatically remove that admin access that is contained or the user has been assigned. So the other strategy that you can look at is also implementing a multi-factor authentication. So basically, multi-factor authentication adds an extra layer of security when identities are trying to access our cloud resources in this case. So this means you're able to provide additional challenge in terms of what the user knows. So this will be now the password. And then also it can be in terms of what the user has, which in this case will be, it can be a prompt that can be sent to the user's mobile phone number, or even a call that will contain the authentication code that can be used, or also what the user is, which in this case now will be in terms of biometrics. So the additional authentication required in this case will be in form of enforcing the user to be able to provide additional proof that indeed they are the ones who are trying to log into your environment. So this at least provides an extra layer of security in the case whereby the credentials for that user maybe got leaked or compromised, and then someone tried to log into the account. So at least that extra layer of authentication required will be able to enforce that user to prove that indeed they are the ones who are trying to log into this specific account. So moving on to the next part is now on the single sign-on. So one of the strategies that we can implement also, which is actually one of the important aspect in terms of identity management, is on the single sign-on. So basically, single sign-on helps the organization, or rather helps the users in terms of accessing the different applications that are within the organization. So since most organizations, maybe they contains several applications that they're utilizing. So instead of a user having multiple passwords to access those different applications that they are currently using, so single sign-on will assist the organization in terms of having a way that a user can just use that central identity that they configured to access the different applications that they contain without having to configure or remember different passwords for different cloud platforms that they currently are utilizing in their environment. So also having that established, the single sign-on established, will minimize that aspect whereby people are currently typing just password when they're logging into the different application that they're currently utilizing, and they can now rely on the central identity that can be configured for the applications that are used within the organization. And the next part also, the strategy that you can look at is also the monitoring and auditing. So monitoring and auditing is one really important aspect of identity management. So basically, in this case, we are talking about now having that visibility into, yes, we have these users in organizations who have access to our resources in our cloud environment. But based on the access that they have, what exactly are they doing in our tenant? So auditing will enable you to be able to have a deep dive into some of the risky activities that the user is performing their normal as activity. So that means you're also able to create some detection rules that can be able to automate for you that investigative process. So instead of you manually going to the portal and start performing some audits manually, you're able to create some detection rules that will be able to alert you in case a specific identity performs an activity that is not allowed in the organization. So for example, based on maybe let's say you gave a contractor access to your cloud environment, maybe an Azure environment in this case, and then they decided to create a very expensive compute machine. But according to your organization resource, that type of compute machine is not allowed to be created by that an external contractor. It can only be created by maybe an internal employee. So you're able to create a detection rule that will be able to flag that activity and notify you so that you're able to take action and make sure that all the activities that are happening within the organization or rather the cloud environment, you're able to track them and have a visibility for. And also in terms of investigation and just compliance, it's also necessary to make sure that we at least implement a way of also storing these audit activities that are happening. So in some cases, or basically in some industries, based on the specific regulation that they have to comply with. For example, if you look at the banking sector, they have to comply with the payment card industry data security standards, which requires them to store these audit events for a specific period of time. So by default, based on the cloud provider that you are using, you're able to retain that audit activity maybe for like 90 days or 60 days or 30 days. But according to the regulation, maybe you are required to store this activity for a period of up to 1 year or even 5 years just for investigational purpose. So another way is also to make sure that you have the measures in place to be able to retain and store these audit activities so that later on in the case it's about compliance and complying with the regulation, you're able to provide the audit activity for the specific period that was requested maybe by the auditors or the people who are performing the investigation. And finally, the last strategy that you can be able to also look at, which is now the most basic and the most common strategy that is currently used by most organizations, which is basically just leveraging the cloud native identity solutions or even third-party solutions that are currently available in the market. So in this case, you're talking about things like now, if you're on AWS, there's now the I&M available there. On Microsoft, you have the Microsoft Entra ID. Same case as Google Cloud, there's also the I&M there. So that means that for each cloud solution provider, they also have their own mechanism that assists you in terms of managing the identity and access that we are granting within our cloud environment. So that means it's our responsibility to make sure that we have configured these services and they're able to provide the security mechanism that they're supposed to also provide when accessing our cloud resources in this case. So we also have other third-party providers, identity management provider that you can also explore, for example, like the Okta. So these are also other third-party providers that you can also be able to have a look at in terms of providing that capability for identity and access management within the organization. So with that in mind now, you just basically be able to have a look at the most famous and the widely used identity management platform in this case, which is basically the Microsoft Entra ID. So Microsoft Entra ID is currently the world's largest cloud identity service, which is also what was previously known as the Azure AD. So if you're familiar to Azure AD, it's the same thing as the Microsoft Entra ID. It's just a rename that Microsoft did. So basically, in terms of statistics, you can see it currently handles more than 30 billion daily authentication requests. So this is a really huge number in terms of the authentications that can be handled by Microsoft Entra ID. So that means also Microsoft has that vast experience in terms of how to manage some of these identities and basically the proper way in terms of how you can be able to protect the identities that are currently being used within the organization. So other than just being the largest cloud identity service based on the numbers, we can also have a look at, because yes, the numbers is one thing, but how are we now managing these numbers and making sure that all the identities, these 30 billion authentication requests, they are all secured. All these 425 million active users every month, they are currently being protected. All the 300,000 organizations using Entra ID are also secure and they are comfortable that Entra ID is providing a proper security mechanism in terms of the identities that are within the organization. So one of the aspects that you can be able to talk about today is a capability within Entra known as the conditional access. So conditional access is one of the capabilities that you can be able to configure to improve the identity security within our organization. So conditional access leverages on the signals that are obtained from the different identities that want to access our organization's data and application. So for example, let's say you have issued access to your cloud resource to a specific individual, and they want to log in and maybe deploy some resources in your cloud environment. So in this case, conditional access is able to understand the signals from the sign-in properties for that user. So that means it's able to check where is this user logging in from, which device are they using, what applications are they using, and also based on the risk, maybe they're logging in using an IP address that was previously used to perform a brute force attack or a proxy IP address. So conditional access and intra identity protection, it's able to understand all those activities. So if right now you try to log in, let's say, using a Linux and you normally log in using a Windows device, so you're able to restrict people from accessing your cloud resources when they are logging in using a Linux box, or maybe when their login location originates from, let's say, an IP in Russia or an IP in other country, you're able to restrict that login activity. So it also has that intelligence capability to understand also the risk behind the IP address related to the login activity. So maybe based on your IP address, it was previously flagged by threat intelligence that it was used, maybe it's used by a botnet, or it was also used previously in an password spray attack or any attack of that sort. So it's able to rely also on that intelligence and be able to challenge that sign-in activity. So that means even before the person is granted access to the organization resources, they are able to be challenged and maybe provide additional proof of verification through multi-factor authentication, or even block them from accessing your organization resources because they do not meet the requirement that you want in terms of the identity, security, and the properties that they have for them to be able to access the resources that we have as an organization. So if you can also just have a quick look of exactly a walkthrough of how this happens in a scenario. So we'll follow along with this example here. They're highlighted in numbers from step 1. So for example, now let's say in this case, a user is trying to log into our Entra ID, which is now our Azure Active Directory in this case. And then based on the login attempt that they want to perform in our organization, Entra ID is able now to calculate the sign-in risk based on the properties that we discussed previously. So the properties here in this case might be something like maybe this user normally logs in using a Windows device, but today they're logging in using a Linux device. And again, they normally log in within Nairobi, but now we see them logging in in Nigeria or even UK. Or based on the application or the browser that they are using, they normally use maybe Chrome or Edge, but now I see them logging in using a Firefox. So it's able to challenge and have a look at what are some of the behavior that this user normally performs previously. And then based on that, it's able to understand like, okay, this is a new behavior for this user. So basically, we'll have to categorize you as a higher risk so that you're able to go ahead and provide additional authentication for that. So that's where now the real-time sign-in risk will be able to challenge you and understand the properties that you are signing in from. And then based on that, it will give you a category, maybe a low risk, high risk user or a medium risk user. And also it's able to leverage an existing risk level. So maybe according to the sign-in activity for this user within the organization, maybe previously, based on a specific activity, maybe they had multiple failed login attempts or logging in using IP address that were previously flagged as malicious. Maybe that user had previously been flagged as a high-risk user. So it's able to also check what is the existing risk level for that specific user. And then based on that activity now, it's able to go ahead and check what are some of the policies that now we have configured within our organization. So based on the risk level for this user, it's now be able to go ahead. Before now, we started from here, before you were given access to the organization resources, we first have to go through this check for the risk based on the properties. And then now based on the policies that we configure to check, it will basically be able to check. So let's say your login is just a normal login. There's no risk identified based on the properties analyzed for your sign in. So you'll basically be able to just go ahead and proceed and complete your sign in attempt. But let's say now is the scenario whereby your login has been found to contain a property that is not common to this specific user. Maybe they are suddenly starting to use Linux and they are not a Linux user. So the identity protection mechanism will be able to flag that user as a risk user. And then based on the policy configured, it will now initiate an additional identity enforcement mechanism. In this case now, they'll be forced to provide additional authentication mechanism so that they can at least prove that even though they are currently using different properties to sign in, indeed they are the one who are still trying to sign in. So that will be covered through now the multi-factor authentication enforcement that can happen in that case. Or if In the case the sign-in based on the properties, it's a really high-risk sign-in attempt. You can even enforce the user to perform a password change, which of course will rely on now the previously configured properties that are required for the password change for the user. And then once they complete that challenge, that's when now they'll be granted access to the organization resources. So this seems like quite a long process, but it actually happens within a seconds. You might not even realize. So basically, this just happens in the background, and based on the risk level that you're categorized under, you're able to be granted access or provided additional challenge for that. So if you can look at also another example based on now the other scenario still on the identity protection. So based on the risk for the identities accessing our organization resource, you're able to also automate some of the enforcements. Maybe, for example, in this case, we have a user who is trying to access our cloud resource in this case. And we know where this user is located and their login information for that. They have the correct password. So they log in using their mobile phone or even their laptop. And then, as I said, the identity protection will basically analyze the properties for this user. So which client application are they using? Which platform? Is it Android? Is it Linux, Windows? Their IP, their location. So all those properties have to be challenged by identity protection before they are given access to the resource. So that means based on the properties identified here, they're able to be categorized as a low risk, medium risk, or a high risk user. So like in this case, according to the properties, it was identified that their IP address is anonymous and their credentials is also leaked. So that means it's able to classify that as a higher risk user. And then based on the policy that will configure in the organization, it's able to now enforce the, or rather block the user from signing into the organization and force a password reset for that user. So the reason why in this case the user might be prompted to reset their password is because based on the analysis done by identity protection on the properties for that sign-in attempt, it was able to understand that the credentials used by this user to sign in to the organization resources, it is a leaked credential, or it is a credential that has currently been identified in the deep web, dark web, or the leaked credentials website. So Microsoft has a team who is responsible actually for gathering those intelligence. So all the credentials that have been leaked and have been shared on the online platform that post the leaked credentials, and also just surfacing the dark web where they share the leaked credentials. So Microsoft actually gathers all that information, and it's able to analyze that against the credentials that are being used by employees within the organization. So that means if, for example, right now, your credentials has been flagged to have been identified on a dark web as a leaked credential. So when you try to sign in, you'll be forced to reset that password because it has been identified. It was seen in the dark web as one of the credentials are leaked online. And also the admins will be able to get an alert based on that a leaked credentials alert that was flagged on that. So the other aspect that you can also be able to talk about in terms of identity management is the aspect of privileged identity management. So basically, here we are talking about managing the access that we are granting, the administrative access that you are granting our users in our environment. So the normal behavior for most organizations when they are granting admin access is just, let's say, I just want access in your, sorry, I want access in your environment. So I'll just be granted that access, which doesn't expire, just an active access. I can use it whenever I want. But now when it comes to implementing privileged identity management, this is one way that you can use to limit the access that you are granting in our organization. So let's say I'm an external contractor, I'm working in your environment or in your organization, and I normally just work 8 hours a day from 8 a.m. maybe to 5 p.m. on Monday to Friday, or just once a week. So based on that, instead of giving me that admin rights, and then I'll have that admin rights forever throughout the period, you're able to use PIM to limit that admin access that I'm granted. So you're able to say, I want this user to activate their admin rights for only 8 hours or only 12 hours. So additionally, you can say before this contractor activate their admin rights to perform their administrative activities in our environment, it has to go through an approval to the manager or the project manager so that they can activate or give the permission for this contractor to access our organization resources, but also you're able to configure it for the contractor to perform a self approval to automatically assign themselves the specific administrative roles that we want to assign them in this case. So additionally, also you can look at, other than just giving them the built-in roles that are contained within Entra ID in this case, you can also be able to utilize the options for customizing the roles that you are granting them. So you need to understand, based on the activities that this person wants to perform in our organization, which is the best admin role I should give this specific user. In addition to that, you might realize that based on the existing admin roles within Entra portal, it is currently excessive. So that means you're able to have the capability to also create your own custom roles that you can be able to be utilizing to assign the admins that you have within the organization. So basically, privileged identity management is one of the capabilities that you can use in terms of limiting and controlling the access that we are granting our end users. And finally, the other aspect that we can look at or discuss in a brief is around now just the overall identity governance. So basically, identity governance, what we aim to achieve here is to make sure that we implement a proper security mechanism within our organization to make sure that right people have the right access to our resources, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we do not impact their productivity. That means we don't want to interrupt their day-to-day activities. So for example, what you have seen, maybe there was a misconfiguration in your MFA policy, and then this MFA policy that you configured is prompting user to authenticate every 30 minutes or every 1 hour. So that's one security mechanism, but it's impacting the productivity of the end user. So when considering implementing this identity management and security mechanism, we also have to consider the impact that it might have on the productivity for our end user. So that means we also have to check the access that we are giving to these users. Do they have the access that they require to perform their day-to-day activity on the resources that they have? And in this case, the access you are talking about, only the access which in this case is enough, just enough access to perform their a day-to-day activity. Also, we talked about monitoring and auditing. So based on this access, what exactly are they doing with the access that they currently have within our organization? Based on that also, you can be able to look at, yes, they have this access, but how can you be able to limit this access, maybe through privileged identity management, or even restricting through multi-factor authentication. And also you have to also keep in mind, yes, we have all these controls in place, but can auditors verify that the controls that you have implemented are properly working? So for example, let's say right now you might sit comfortably and say, we have implemented multi-factor authentication in our organization, but when an auditor comes in and check the configurations that you have performed, they realize that the scope of your MFA policy does not cover the whole organization. So that means there is a misconfiguration in that case, and there is a gap that can be exploited by malicious actors in terms of the exclusion for the accounts that are not targeted with multi-factor authentication. So that means you need to have also that understanding or awareness that the configurations that we have done in our environment are actually working properly, so that we also are quite sure when the auditors come in to check our configurations, indeed they'll be accurate and they'll be speaking to what we have configured. So we can just talk briefly as we wind up about some of the third-party tools that you can be able to utilize in your organization to assist you in terms of identity management, and also verifying that the configurations that we have done in organization actually work and they have targeted the whole organization. So for example, if you can leverage that example I've given for the MFA for the whole organization. So there are some tools that you can be able to utilize online, and they're available on actually on Azure Marketplace, which is within Azure Portal. So here are some of the tools that have been developed by different Microsoft partners that can assist also in terms of managing or just performing some of the assessment or the checks that you want. So for example, I'll use an example of this tool that was developed by our guys in organization. So it's one of the free tools available in Azure Marketplace that you can use to verify that the configurations that we have done around our identity in our organization actually works, or it's actually covering the whole organization. So in this case, we'll be able to just run an assessment that will basically fetch. So yes, right now you might sit comfortably and say, we have implemented multi-factor authentication in our organization, but you might want to just have a way of checking and verifying, have we really implemented MFA for all the users in organization? So this free tool is able to now go ahead and perform that analysis of the different identities that are contained within the organization. And it will now tell us, based on the configuration that you have done, maybe this specific user has not been, MFA has not been enabled for this specific user, or MFA has been enabled for this specific user. So the tool will just basically run based on the permissions that you have in your environment. And as you said, it will just basically give you a report and tell you, yes, these are the users who have access to your Azure subscription, which maybe contains the resources that you have. And then based on that, it will tell you MFA has not been enabled for that specific user, because also it has been disabled. Another important aspect that you also have to consider in terms of enabling MFA and enforcing MFA in organization is the method that was used to enforce MFA. So in this case, we have different methods actually for enforcing MFA. There is the per user MFA, there's the security default, and there's the conditional access MFA. So in this case, the preferred method is actually the best method is the conditional access MFA, but you might realize some organizations are still using the per user MFA, which has proven to provide, or rather to have some gaps in terms of the enforcement for the MFA policy. So in this case, it will even give you a recommendation that we need to enforce the MFA based on the security defaults or the conditional access MFA. But if you realize that you're utilizing MFA for the per user configuration, that should not be the actively used MFA because of the gaps that are contained in the per user MFA, and instead choose to leverage the conditional access MFA, which is the best because it gives you flexibility in terms of the rules that you can configure as compared to the security defaults MFA, which also works, but it's just basically for an basic MFA enforcement for an administrator who maybe doesn't understand the different configurations within the identity landscape in that case. So this is just an example of some of the third-party partner provided free tools that you can also be able to leverage to understand your environment and identities that you're utilizing there. So to conclude my presentation today is that identity is a really crucial aspect of cloud security. So that means it requires careful attention and robust strategies, which you have some of them you have covered in this session, to make sure that we have our end-to-end security and all the access that we have granted to our resources are actually the access that are needed and able to secure all the resources that we have. So with that, I'll end my presentation from there, and I welcome any question or clarification needed on that. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot, Kevin. So